Hey, so you clicked on this video because you want to find out what the best crosshair to use in Valorant is. Well, you're in luck, because for the last year, I have dedicated myself to finding out the answer to this question. I have not only used 100 different crosshairs, but I've extensively gone through each crosshair and the experience that I had and how I felt in the matches based on the crosshair that I was using and when I was using it and who I was using it with. And all of this has led to me finding some of the key components that I think makes a good crosshair. As players, we all have different playstyles and different preferences. So it's hard to say that there's one ideal crosshair that works the best for everybody. I'm going to divide the video up into different tiers based off how good I thought these crosshairs were, but also why I placed them in those tiers. So while I might not get too detailed, my goal is that I give you enough information so that you can make the best informed decision for yourself. The game has been out for 4 years, and what is the best Valorant crosshair is still one of the most searched questions on YouTube. Which, by the way, if you're new to my channel, I do a lot of videos over the state of Valorant and just commentary over where it is, what the devs are doing, how the community is feeling. So if this is your first time here, thanks for clicking on this video. I appreciate you being here, and I hope you'll consider subscribing, if not at least liking this video. It's been a hard time to go to 100 different crosshairs over the last year or so. So I would really appreciate it if you took the time to do either of those two. But with that said, let's get into this video. I am excited to give you all the information that I learned from this experience, and hopefully you're able to walk away from this video having a better understanding of not only what makes a good crosshair, but specifically what crosshair will work the best for you. So tier 4. Of the 100 crosshairs I tried out, the ones that ended up in this tier are not ones that I would recommend ever using. Unless you wanted to mess around, I guess, or if you're content pilled. A crosshair is meant to help you out, and these crosshairs not only fail miserably to do that, but they actually become a hindrance to the player. A majority of these are obnoxiously big, covering too much of the crosshair area, or have lost the point of what a crosshair is meant to be. So why even add these into the video if you're only going to tell me not to use them, I hear you asking. Well, because these crosshairs, as difficult as they may have been to use in certain matches, could be ignored. Ultimately, a bad crosshair can hold you back, but exposed long enough, you're actually pretty likely to get used to it and adapt. But this time is time that you could be spending instead on other fundamental skills to improve in Valo. And since many of you are after the quote-unquote ideal crosshair because you want to rank up, it's important that you are aware of how your gameplay is changing over time. And so if you're spending time trying to adapt to a bad crosshair, this overall is a hindrance to your playstyle. Take the eyes crosshair, for example. This one is obnoxious. It doesn't focus on anything, and it's difficult to concentrate with. These two attributes make this crosshair almost impossible to use, but as you can see in the clip, I'm still able to get some kills. After playing with the crosshair a certain amount of time, you can still do fine, but you know, why bother struggling so much when you can just use an easier crosshair to use? Likewise, the 5 crosshairs crosshair is pretty funny, because why bother having one if you can have 5? But this one has the issue of focusing on too much. It's not only difficult to concentrate with, but you can pretty easily misinterpret where you're actually aiming at. Of course, you will naturally know to aim at the center of the 5 crosshairs, but again, why put yourself through the struggle? This is where the tier 3 crosshairs come in. These are crosshairs that you would more than likely arrive to if you opted to briefly mess around with the crosshair settings. They're crosshairs, so at the end of the day, they'll get the job done, but they're still not the most optimal. These are also the ones I would say that didn't necessarily hold me back from ranking up, but were ones that I was actively needing to get used to mid-game, which can take away from your attention from the game itself. Take, for example, the Among Us crosshair. It's small enough that it doesn't entirely get in the way, but I mean, you got this guy looking back at you during the whole match. At some point or another, you're just getting distracted, and again, why adapt to your crosshair when you can just start with the good one from the start? This brings me to another point that has come up as we start looking at these crosshairs. Should you shy away from creativity? I don't think so, not necessarily. Some creative crosshairs can be useful, but arguably, the point of a crosshair is to remain as simple as possible, and the reasoning for that is that you don't want to be distracted while you're trying to aim. So like that Among Us crosshair that we just went over, something like that, in the spur of the moment, if you're locked in, arguably you're probably not looking at your crosshair in that much detail, but throughout the match as you're setting up, or just sitting there waiting for somebody to peek, how many times have you gotten distracted by your minimap? Now think about how many times are you more than likely going to get distracted if you have a very creative and visually appealing crosshair to look at. Now we're getting into the more interesting part of the crosshairs. Tier 2 crosshairs are actually pretty good. They don't hinder you typically in any way, which is one of the things we are looking for. I'm not sure if she's still using this crosshair, but at the time when I started making this list, this crosshair actually belongs to Kaide. The interesting thing about this one is that it's a rather small size, and most of the crosshairs in this tier are smaller crosshairs. The point of these crosshairs are that they're small enough that they don't distract you from anything while you're in the middle of a gunfight or trying to aim down, but that they're big enough that they stand out from whatever the surroundings are. And to re-emphasize my earlier point, creativity is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just how you use that creativity. This crosshair, the candy one, doesn't stand out too much, but because of its unique design, it's very easy to tell it apart from anything in the background. Tier 2 crosshairs, I will reiterate, are good crosshairs. There's nothing wrong with them. If anything, I think this is where you start to look at the different preferences that a player can have. What color your crosshair is, what size that crosshair is, all matters to each of us individually. So I would recommend checking out some of the tier 2 crosshairs that I've dropped below down in the description. Give them all out a try, but we're looking for the best crosshair. And that crosshair is most likely going to be one that makes me shoot better and overall play better, right? A good crosshair in Valorant I have found to be, throughout my experience of using these 100 different crosshairs, at its core, it needs to be simple enough that it does not contribute any distractions to you during a match, and it does the job that a crosshair is meant to do, which is just to help you aim and know where you are aiming at. This is the tier you are looking for. These crosshairs build upon everything that I've talked about with all of the different tiers. They simplify what the crosshair is doing for you during a match, they reduce any unnecessary flare that might distract you, and their sole purpose is to exist to help you aim. So it should be of no surprise to anybody that these crosshairs all belong to pros. Now saying it out loud, it makes sense if you're paid to professionally play this game at a professional level where competition is fierce and you have to be better than everybody, meaning that you are doing everything possible at your hands that is disposable to you to make sure that you're consistently playing at a high level. You would more than likely have figured out what type of crosshair works for you individually. Let's take Tarek's crosshair for example. This is literally just a dot, and it is very small. And surprisingly, this super simple crosshair has made it so easy for me to feel like I knew exactly where I was aiming at during the entire match that I played with it. Keeping up with the same beat. Mexx's crosshair, one of my goats. Fundamentally simple. It's arguably very similar to the crosshair that you use when you first start out the game, except it's a little smaller, little thinner lines, very easy to keep track of and know where you are aiming. I mean, look at the difference. Now we're looking at Ethan's crosshair and it looks pretty much similar to Mexx's, if not a little bit smaller with slightly more spacing in between the lines. I know some of you will be very disappointed with the results, and it's hard for me to sit here and tell you just use what the pros are doing. But that's why I created these different tiers, to build up to this main point that ultimately a good crosshair just needs to be simple, and you need to know what works for you. The reason all of these pros have very similar crosshairs is because they understand this concept. It needs to be simple, it needs to be easy on the eyes, and it cannot at all distract you from your ultimate goal of knowing where you are aiming. And so with all of that in mind, a good crosshair can still be quite literally any crosshair that you want. It just needs to meet most of those criteria, and most importantly, it needs to work for you. There is not a universal key when it comes to a crosshair, because that's why the crosshair system exists in the first place. The reason there's so much ability to customize how your crosshair looks is because there needs to be that level for you to get to a crosshair that helps you succeed in this game. At the end of the day, you're not going to find the one crosshair that works for everybody. But the reason that people continuously look up what is the best Valorant crosshair is, whether they realize it or not, in hopes of being exposed to the crosshair that looks like the best one to them. If you use any of the tier 1 crosshairs, I'm sure you will have a very easy time aiming and doing well in Valorant. Honestly, if you use any of the tier 2 or heck any of the tier 3 crosshairs, I'm sure you will be fine. My personal favorite, I gotta give a shout out to Kaide's crosshair. I remember using that crosshair for multiple matches. In fact, I think I took a brief pause from going through my crosshair list because I enjoyed using Kaide's crosshair that much. And sometimes that's just kind of what it comes down to. In the moment, you try out a crosshair and you really like it, and the next thing you know, it's the crosshair that you've been using for the last year. It is all based on personal preference. I think it's really cool that Valorant has enabled the feature of being able to directly copy the crosshair of somebody that you are spectating, because that's how we get exposed to these different crosshairs. It's a very disappointing conclusion. And you're telling me, because I'm the one that played with these 100 crosshairs. For the last year, I have spent playing these different matches trying to find the solution to this question that keeps popping up. I was pretty disappointed to be like, well, you know, just go look at what the pros are doing. But now I can confidently say that while that might work for the majority of people, I now understand why that might not be the solution for everybody. At the end of the day, a good crosshair just needs to be one that is simple enough for you to keep up with and does not take your attention away from what you are looking at. As creative as some of those initial crosshairs were, if you were seriously trying to grind and rank up, the last thing you want to do is give yourself an excuse on why you are playing bad. I'm going out on a limb here and I'm saying that the crosshair that you use in Valorant does not nearly matter as much as people believe it to be. There are other fundamental things that you need to do as a Valorant player to improve. Anytime I've uploaded a video, somebody has gone out of their way to critique this one skill that people will always critique you about. And I'll give you a hint, it has to do with placement. With that said, thank y'all for watching this video. It took a minute for me to put this together, so I would appreciate any likes, comments. If you want to subscribe, please do. I would appreciate that. And with that said, comment down below what crosshair you're currently using. The crosshair list that I have will be in the description. I hope you'll have a good one. Keep on grinding, and here's to the next video.